Hello, Bill.
Good morning, Matt.
Welcome to the DMZ, everybody.
We are taping Wednesday morning, so at this juncture, we don't know what's going to be in the FBI investigation. I know McConnell has said that they're going to vote on Kavanaugh by the end of the week, no matter what. So if he holds to that, we don't know what the outcome there is. So always a little dicey, taping midweek in the era of Trump, but we're going to do our best.
It's just dicey no matter when you tape. I mean, it doesn't matter when. There is no safe time for us to do this. Mm-hmm. Whenever we tape, within the hour, there will be something that's changed. You just have to do it.
But people keep asking me just socially, what do you think the odds are? And this entire time, even before the allegations came out and afterwards, I've always said 90% chance of confirmation.
Wow.
And I've not wavered on that. But what's your sense of where things stand?
Oh, I don't think I'd go 90. That's high. But I think if you're betting, you bet on confirmation. I don't think that this FBI report is going to produce anything that will be evidence or proof that would disqualify Kavanaugh. And so then I think you have to just look at the numbers. And, I think Murkowski and Collins seem pretty solid, barring some huge revelation. I think Flake is the wild card, but you could lose Flake. I think you very well may pick up Manchin. And so, maybe I'm 80, 75. Let's go 75% confirmation. I think just in terms of the timeline, my understanding is whatever the FBI report comes back, let's say it's Friday, because that would be 1 week. McConnell could then basically go to Flake, Murkowski, and Collins and say, are two of you with me? If they are, they could vote on cloture. I think they have to wait 30 hours. That means that Brett Kavanaugh could potentially be, according to that timeline, on the Supreme Court, confirmed at the Supreme Court at least, by Sunday.
I mean, the reason why I give it a 10% going the other way is that Flake, Murkowski, Collins, they are wild cards. We can't get in their heads and know exactly what they're feeling. They might do something that goes against what their body language and what their public comments have suggested so far. But I can only go on that, what I can see, and it seems to me that Collins and Murkowski have let Flake take the lead here. They have said very little to suggest an interest in voting no. A bit more so in Murkowski's case than Collins' case. But I would say, generally speaking, they have not gone publicly and suggested that they think Kavanaugh is lying or they were perturbed by his performance. Flake has done a little of that. Flake has said that he thought he started by saying he was properly defending himself, and then he veered too far, got too sharp, I think it was his phrase, in the latter part. But his initial decision was to vote yes. That's what he wants to do. He wants to have a conservative justice on the court because he is a conservative. He also
wants to be liked. I think Jeff Flake, and look, you can frame what he did as noble. We may look back, and it may be that Kavanaugh's on the court, and we may look back and be thankful that at least they took a week to do the FBI investigation. But it strikes me that Jeff Flake is a man who very much wants to be popular and liked, and I think that he is one. How do you? I'll put it this way: like, God forbid, what happens if a protester catches Flake in an elevator before the next vote? I have no idea. Like, would that sway him to vote no?
Well, I wouldn't put it in terms of being liked, not being liked. I mean, maybe that gets a sort of psychological reasoning that I can't discern from afar. I do think, based on his public comments, he is concerned about the state of the body politic, the degree of polarization and rough partisanship. And on the left, of course, this is, laughed at, that he's having his moment of anguish before he does the predictable Republican thing. But to take him at face value, he wants a conservative justice on the court via a process that does not tear the country apart.
I think he has, in the long run, it's possible that we will look back and we will say that this extra week added a certain amount of legitimacy to the Supreme Court. In the short run, Jeff Flake has contributed to tearing this country apart by prolonging this, and I think that it's mostly done so that Jeff Flake looks like a nice, good guy.
Well, he is going to end this process, I assume, by annoying everybody and not being the most loved person in the American political system. But I think
everybody will hate him, right? The left will hate him for voting for Kavanaugh, if you're right, and the right will hate him for looking like a wimp,
right? And for grandstanding, for dragging this out. All that kind of stuff. But what I think he is trying to do, and I'm not saying I think he is correct in doing this, but I think his motivation is, let's be sure that no one can question that we did our due diligence and we vetted as best as we possibly could. We're going to get to a point where the FBI is going to say, this is just inconclusive. We can't draw any final decisions here. We interviewed everybody. Here's the raw data. You're going to have to make up your own mind here.
Yeah.
And he's going to say, look, I just can't condemn a guy for allegations from 40 years ago that we can't definitively prove one way or the other. But gosh darn it, we gave it our best shot. That's where I think and once he does that, I imagine Collins and Murkowski are going to fall in line, because at bottom, they want conservative justices on the court. They're not. I mean, if you want to deny him, you have reason to deny him. But if you want to have a conservative on the court, there are reasons you can draw from.
Well, I think his motivation could be to get a contributorship to CNN or MSNBC based on his behavior.
But he could have gotten that anyway. He didn't need to go through this whole drama to get that.
I hope that this turns out that we look back on this, because here's the thing, Bill. The left is not, remember, was it Senator Coons who kept saying, just give us a week. Just, the Clarence Thomas FBI investigation was only 3. Is it asking too much for a week? If Jeff Flake believes that a week and the FBI putting out a report that basically says, it's a he said, she said, this was 36 years ago, we don't have any proof that anything happened, but, if he thinks that is in any way going to appease the people who believe that Brett Kavanaugh is a would-be rapist, then he's insane. So what he's done is prolong the agony for a week, and by the way, stuff's coming out now about Dr. Ford that probably wouldn't have come out.
And this the stuff that has come out on her is in no way relevant to the charge.
Well, I don't think, but I think that stuff about Brett Flanders drinking is also in no way relevant to the charge. So we've been treated to a week of drunk shaming and maybe slut shaming is what we've gotten from Jeff Flake.
Well, what's happening with the drinking aspect, and for those who want to say maybe I should be upping my odds of denial to to 20%, Flake has said that if you can demonstrably prove he was lying to us, lying in his testimony, that would be disqualifying. So we have somewhat shifted in the public discussion from was he trying to rape Dr. Ford to what is he lying about his drinking in college and high school.
I think that's a trap Democrats are falling for, to be honest with you. I don't think, number one, he did talk quite a bit. Kavanaugh talked quite a bit about drinking heavily. Mm-hmm. and loving beer. He went out of his way to talk about that. But putting that aside, if you switch from talking about attempted rape and now you're betting on perjury about lying about drinking, I think that's a strategic mistake, and I think Democrats, some are falling for that trap.
Well, I mean, it's only falling for that trap if Jeff Flake then says, all right, we can't prove he was lying about that either, and therefore I have to vote yes. I mean, he has given some indication that if you could prove it, that would be reason to vote no. And we talk about degree. He is saying, yes, I drank heavily at times, but I didn't black out or do this or that. And people are saying, oh, it really was that bad. And I am assuming that Republicans want a conservative justice, and they're going to find a way to get him there at the end of the day. You can understand if you're a Democrat and one, if you think, I mean, I want to be careful how I phrase this, because I think there are two motivations here on the left. I mean, one is the basic: you don't want a conservative anti-Roe judge on the court. We think he's an anti-Roe judge. We want to find a way to stop him. I mean, that's certainly, I mean, that was there before Dr. Ford's allegations. He can't pretend that's not there. I think there is also a Me Too driven motivation, which is we have to stop enabling and sanctioning and elevating people who commit sexual misconduct, no matter when it occurred. We don't care about this argument that people shouldn't be condemned for what they did 30 years ago. Screw that. People need to be held accountable. If people don't get Supreme Court positions or CEO positions or winning elections, so someone else who didn't have that on in their past gets in that slot anyway, that's just fine. And in that motivation, like, there's some people that will say, look, I'll take Amy Barrett over Brett Kavanaugh because there's no evidence she commits sexual misconduct. Now, if you are primarily focused on protecting Roe, Amy Barrett for Brett Kavanaugh doesn't get you very far. But I do think some people are primarily motivated on the Me Too grounds, even more so than the judicial political grounds.
Right. Well, I was going to say, I mean, first, we're taping this on Wednesday, so that means that Democrats have maybe 48 hours, right, until this FBI report comes out.
Yeah.
We'll see. I mean, who knows? Maybe they'll postpone it. That wouldn't surprise me. But so let's just operate under the premise that Democrats, liberals have 48 hours. You can either spend those 48 hours talking about how Brett Kavanaugh might have attempted rape back in high school, or you could talk about how he might have fibbed about drinking too much in high school and college. Which of those two options is most likely to resonate? I think it's a trap to, and it's, not only is it irrelevant, I think it's a trap to go down the drinking thing.
Well, it sort of relates to both prongs of the attack on Kavanaugh. If you can flip a senator on the grounds that he committed perjury in his testimony, who cares what the subject matter is? You got him on perjury. And that's as good as it is convincing to a senator or two senators. It also applies to the sexual misconduct charge, because if you can say, hey, he's lying about X, that must mean he also might be lying about Y. But I agree with, but that's I don't agree with you. If
one of these things
on its own, he drank too much in high school, so what? A lot of us did. That shouldn't penalize you for being on the court. If that is the entirety of the discussion, he would likely get on.
Yeah. The other thing too is, and I haven't talked about this at all because I don't think it's necessarily relevant, but since we are setting up this standard, this new standard, I guess Cory Booker admitted in a memoir to having groped a girl or a woman years ago. Beto O'Rourke, as big of a fan as you know I am, Bill, wrote something, I guess in high school that was
college
in college that was sexist, I would say, and maybe misogynistic is a better word. I'm not sure.
Well, so it was objectifying. He was criticizing a Broadway musical. He thought it was a bad musical with untalented people, and he commented that the only value that the women brought to it were their size of their breasts and their buttocks.
These are our heroes on the Democratic, young, up-and-coming Democratic heroes,
so
right?
look,
is that the standard? Or should we have those kinds of people who did and said those kinds of things in the U.S. Senate?
Well, I mean, there are people on the left that say Al Franken should have been ridden out of town and railed. There's some people that say he should have got an investigation, and what he was charged with, pales in comparison to what we're talking about with other folks. So I think there's not unanimity on this question, even amongst Democrats. But this stuff might come up in 2020. I mean, Cory Booker's almost sure to run. Some people talk about Beto. I don't assume that's be the case.
I've been told. I'm sorry. Number one, I've been told I interrupt too much. I've been scolded that we're pronouncing it's Beto.
Okay. Beto.
Not Beto. And
okay.
I've been calling him Beto, but I've been scolded by Texans and told.
Well, it's supposed to be short for Roberto, right?
That's what I thought, but
right.
It's anyway. Sound off in the comments.
I'm sure I'll get it wrong again. But to the extent that this does come up with, say, Booker, the only thing you can do to salvage your candidacy is to say, I admitted it, I learned from it, I've grown since then, I understand how awful that was, and I certainly have not done it ever since. You can trust I'm going to be a faithful ally going forward. That might be sufficient, or people might say, look, that's nice that you've grown as a person. I want someone who never did this at all. Most likely a woman who I know has never done anything like this. So I think that debate's going to occur in the 2020 primary. Now, you wrote a piece about this issue for the Daily Beast where you expressed concern that we are losing the standard of presumption of innocence in all of this.
Yeah, no, I think that's true. I mean, so, the obvious caveat is that, the presumption of innocence applies to criminal court cases or criminal allegations. And that's true. On the other hand, though, I think people are framing this as a job interview, which is not exactly maybe the right framing either. I mean, I've never had a public job interview, and I've never been accused of attempted rape in any of my job interviews. And so I don't know that that's exactly the right analogy either. My point, though, is that that the believe all women mantra is at odds with the presumption of innocence. And I sort of went through a little history. The presumption of innocence goes back a long, long way. But certainly in American history, Ben Franklin, sort of citing Voltaire, said that it'd be better for 10 guilty men to go free than for one innocent man to be punished. That has been sort of part of our built-in ethos. And I think that there are a lot of things that are being questioned right now in liberal democracy. One of them, I think, is this presumption of innocence. Again, I'm using the Kavanaugh example as kind of a news peg to have a larger discussion, but the assumption that you should always believe all women certainly transcends the Kavanaugh case. And I do think it is at odds with the presumption of innocence. You can't really do both. You can't believe all women and also put the onus on the accused to prove his innocence.
Right, but as you said, this is not a standard being asked to apply to court cases, but to apply to people's public standing, people's ability to advance in careers and be put in positions of power. It's notable to me that the presumption of innocence has been more readily embraced historically on the left than the right. The right is promoted more law and order. They were unhappy with Miranda rights. They're unhappy to see any people getting off on technicalities in a court of law. Whereas people on the left would say you need to have these standards to ensure proper, police behavior. Right. And that's why these technicalities are not more than just technicalities. They maintain a fair system of justice. And when it comes to sexual misconduct, many people on the right say, whoa, let's have some presumption of innocence here. Let's not condemn anyone who gets accused of sexual misconduct. And people on the left obviously are pushing for, even inside the court of law, you don't see a lot of sympathy for first-time sexual misconduct offenders getting light sentences. They want very stiff sentences. They don't want probation for first-time offenders if it's rape, whereas they might be more inclined for other types of crimes, and vice versa for conservatives. But I do think that it is certainly different in a case like Kavanaugh, where you're not talking about courts. You're not talking about legal sentencing. You're not talking about criminal sentencing. And I do think what we have learned as a society from Harvey Weinstein, from Bill Cosby, is that people, by and large, when they are saying they have been sexually abused, by and large are telling the truth. There are examples where that's not been the case. Duke Lacrosse case, that Rolling Stone article, but those are the exceptions, and their exceptions are important when you're talking about throwing people in jail. But our inclination to take an accuser and put her through the ringer publicly, which is additionally traumatizing for the accuser and a massive disincentive to report these types of these cases, that has not done us very well as a society, because it allows more sexual misconduct to continue unabated. So I agree with you. You want to be careful not to let this bleed into the criminal sentencing system. We don't want to lose presumption of innocence in our courts, and we do want to be a little careful that it's not just a single accusation that can stop any kind of career, because there are certainly examples where those accusations have been done disingenuously. But by and large, that's not been the case.
Let me ask you, because I think part of the believe the woman theory is that if you're a victim of sexual assault or abuse, that it's very the theme is that nobody wants to come forward. It's very difficult to come forward. Most people don't come forward, and you're afraid people won't believe you. And it could be embarrassing or intimidating and all of those things. However, when you make a charge, I would ask you, Bill Scher, let's say, what if we found out that Dr. Ford had a history of making charges like this, had accused other people of these kind of things? Or what if other past friends or boyfriends of her come forward and say, listen, this person has done some things that I would deem to be not of a good character, that would really call into question whether or not I would believe her. Is that fair? Does that become fair game, or are you not allowed to raise those kind of questions?
Well, I think those kinds of questions amount to more character assassination than actual testing of the credibility of the initial allegation. If you're gonna do shoot the messenger, which is what typically gets done, I think the evidence has shown that is not a very useful way to get at the actual truth. Take a current example. Excuse me if I'm mispronouncing your name. Asia Argento. She gave a famous speech talking about her abuse at the hands of Harvey Weinstein. I don't think anyone disputes that didn't happen, because we have all these other cases of Harvey Weinstein that we have very hard evidence about. But also seems to be the case that she sexually abused a male minor. So she is not necessarily a flawless person by any stretch. Doesn't mean she was lying about the accusation to Harvey Weinstein. So if you're going to, I agree that it should not be one person makes an accusation and we're done here. Take it at face value. No need for any investigation. No need for any exploration. You make the accusation, that guy is done for. That to me is too much. You should investigate, but you can investigate without character assassination. You could test the evidence of the alleged crime without saying, well, this person did this over here and that over here and this over there. They're a flawed person. It's the whole Anita Hill, a little bit nutty, a little bit slutty kind of approach, which I think that needs to end.
All right, let me ask you, or let me bring up another point. So right now people are saying, like, this is not, we're not criminally, Kavanaugh's not in any criminal jeopardy here in terms of what he may or may not have done 36 years ago. This is a job interview. And what I'm saying is that I'm suggesting that that if we get rid of the presumption of innocence when it comes to other things, that has like a spillover effect. And this reminds me of the conversation of, like, if a company fires you for something you said, then everyone says that's a violation of the first, your First Amendment, your right to free speech, and everyone else says no. Like, only the government can violate your First Amendment. You have no right to free speech at your job. They can fire you for it. It's just that the government can't persecute you for what you say. That's, I would argue that while technically true, if we created a culture or a civilization where everyone had to have a job, and that job was policing and censoring your words and your conversation, in effect, we would have created a country, a civilization, a society where free expression is not permitted, right? It doesn't matter if it's the government telling me what I can't say or think, or if it's just the fact that I can't actually put food on my table unless I say and think certain things. And I think this is, to me, I mean, I'm sort of very thinking out loud here, and this is very raw and probably not terribly, articulated terribly well. But I do think that even if you put aside the criminal aspect in the court of law, if we create a civilization or a society where any allegation, especially in terms of like sexual impropriety coming from a woman against a man, can sink your nomination, can sink your job interview, can sink. You got a book coming out next month, and someone launches an allegation. You finally got a TV show. You're going to be hosting Morning Scher, and a week before that comes out, somebody on the right launches an allegation. Do we want to create a society? And again, I know that this is an extreme version of this, but I am fearful of that kind of slippery slope.
Let me shift gears. Talk about my recent article for Politico.
Wait, don't you have to respond to this?
I was giving you the last word.
I want you to tell me if I'm crazy or if this is like.
Well, again, I think that it is over to have just one accusation be determinative, one utterance of an accusation be determinative of somebody's reputation is not going to be useful. It's not going to help us get to the bottom of the truth in all circumstances, because there are going to be the occasional cases where somebody's not telling the truth. You need to do some kind of investigation. I mean, these are not going to be, again, criminal matters, so it's not always going to be an FBI investigation. But businesses do internal investigations, journalists do investigations. There's ways to do investigations to understand as best as you can what corroborating evidence exists to support the allegation. That should be done when accusations arise. You should test what the accuser is saying, but you can test those accusations without going after the character of the accuser and bringing in instances that are irrelevant to the matter at hand.
I hate to belabor this because I do want to move on too, but I would just say that's exactly what's happening in the Kavanaugh case. My guess is they're not going to have any proof or evidence after having done the investigation. And then that would mean that we should confirm Brett Kavanaugh based on that?
Well, we're talking about a situation where the people that get to decide are the people who are already elected into office, and because there's no filibuster anymore, it is essentially going to be decided by 51 Republicans. And if the public doesn't like how they handled this matter, now granted they're not all up for re-election at the same time, but there's a partial opportunity to weigh in on election day whether you think they handled it well or not. I mean, we had after the Clarence Thomas hearings, Thomas got confirmed, but a lot of people were mad about it, and a number of people lost their jobs a year later. And when the next court nominee came up, and it was an anti-Roe justice in Byron White, that person got replaced by Ruth Bader Ginsburg. So there was some political democratic response to how that was handled, and that may be the case again this time around. Although, again, so many of these races are on conservative turf, I can't predict that it's going to shake out that way.
Gotcha. All right, let's move on.
Well, but to have a connection to the question, should women be believed? As you may know, this week is the week that the new Stormy Daniels memoir, Full Disclosure, is published, which I honored by conducting a review of every book ever published by a presidential mistress. And it's a pretty decent sized canon. And it goes back to Nan Britton's, the president's daughter. She was a mistress of Warren Harding, and she alleged in the book that Harding fathered her child, Elizabeth Ann. And at the time, she wasn't widely believed. There are some people that did. Dorothy Parker famously believed her, but H.L. Mencken believed her, but many people did not. She didn't have love letters because they were destroyed at Harding's request, destroyed upon reading. And there weren't DNA tests who could prove the paternity of the child. They did the paternity test 3 years ago and found that she was telling the truth. So there's that example. After that book, there was Kay Summerby's Past Forgetting about her affair with Eisenhower. And even though that book came out a year after Harry Truman was published saying that they had this affair, many historians still didn't believe it. They said, "Oh, that's Harry, that old coot Harry Truman. He doesn't know what he's talking about."
Wait, was this in Truman's biography?
So Truman did interviews for an oral history.
Okay.
In 1964. It was published in 1973. And Truman not only said that Eisenhower asked the Army Chief of Staff, George Marshall, to be relieved of duty after World War II so he could divorce Mamie and continue his relationship with Kay Summersby. Marshall angrily denied that request. And Truman said that these letters were in Eisenhower's file, and he destroyed them. So he's not saying I heard this secondhand. He's saying I had the letters, and I destroyed them myself to protect Eisenhower's reputation. He wanted to say, I don't like Eisenhower, but I did this to save his bacon anyway. And historians still said at the time, "Oh, that can't be right. Yeah, that guy doesn't know what he's talking about." And It was about 15 years later that the letters that Kay Summersby saved were sold at an auction, and they're not pornographic, but they back up the narrative that she told. And soon after that, you had Judith Exner had My Story. Judith Exner was a John F. Kennedy mistress. Her name came out in the mid-'70s when the Church Committee was investigating the CIA's role in assassination of foreign leaders, and there was evidence that JFK had contracted the mob to take out Castro, and that a close friend of Kennedy's was a liaison between JFK and the mob. The Washington Post dug out that they're referring to Judith Exner. She gives a press conference saying, yes, she had an affair at JFK. Yes, she did have a relationship with Sam Giansana from the Chicago Mafia, but she wasn't a courier. And she wrote a book talking about how she had relationships with the two. Later on, after the book published, she said, I didn't tell the full story. I was a courier between the two. I didn't want to say it at the time because Giansana got killed before he was going to testify to the Senate. Johnny Rosselli got killed. So after his testimony, I didn't want to get killed myself, so I didn't cop to that. We do know, based on White House logs, that she was a frequent visitor to the White House. And we know from the files that were released just this year that Kennedy's CIA did contract Giansana and Rosselli to take out Castro. So there's a lot of evidence backing up Exner's story. These are all people who were not readily believed at the time. And we're not talking about, sexual misconduct in those cases. There's another JFK mistress, Mimi Alford, who did allege sexual and emotional abuse.
Isn't there an underage girl?
Well, that's Mimi Alford. Mimi Alford was 19. She was an intern for 4 days when Kennedy's aide invites her for a White House swim in the White House pool.
Oh, she was 19?
She was 19.
Okay.
In college. And she takes the swim. Later that same day, in the evening, she's invited to a small staff get-together. She's given 2 daiquiris by Kennedy's aide, Dave Powers. Soon after, Kennedy shows up, invites her on a private tour, and wordlessly, seduces her that night, which, she says in the book, many people come up to me and says that was rape, and she says, I don't think it was rape, although it wasn't making love, but it wasn't non-consensual. But later on, she says, at another White House swim, Kennedy says, Dave Powers is looking a little tense over there. Why don't you go relax him? Which he immediately understands to mean she's asking him to give him oral sex, which she does. There's a separate incident where she's at a party with Kennedy in Hollywood, and he gives her a drug called a popper without her consent. She says no, and she gives it to him. She puts it up her nose anyway. And then in the fall of '63, they're at a Boston fundraiser together, and he tries to do the same. Why don't you go relax Teddy Kennedy? And that's when she says, absolutely not, how dare you? And she says that's a turning point, in her life. Now,
Ted Kennedy's the no-go. The other guys were okay, but Ted Kennedy's a no-go.
Well,
by the way, I saw a piece somewhere that I didn't know about where Ted Kennedy and Chris Dodd had
there's the waitress incident. Yes.
What's up with that? Is that? I mean, I don't.
Forgive me if my memory is fading about this. I think Dodd disputes this.
Okay.
But it has been often repeated that there was an incident in a restaurant where Kennedy and Dodd are abusive towards a waitress.
I never heard that until this week. Someone unearthed it or it resurfaced somehow.
I mean, I am not arguing that Ted Kennedy. There are plenty of instances that involve Ted Kennedy that suggest he was abusive.
I don't want to say that he was a bridge too far. But in this case, it sounds like it was.
Right. I just don't know off the top of my head if the waitress story is fully corroborated, but I do know it's been often repeated. But in the case of Mimi Alford, you only can go on her word as far as the abusive incidents are concerned. But she wasn't seeking the spotlight in the first place. She was named in a 1964 oral history by another White House aide, which was uncovered by historian Robert Dallek. And so he published it. I think he first published it without using her name. And then a Daily News, and Mimi Alford's telling a Daily News reporter tracked her down. And this point, this is only a few years ago. She was, I think 60 or around 60, and says, "Are you the intern that Dallek's referring to?" And she said, "Yes." And so it's only then when she talked about the details of it. So I think that story is credible because there's other evidence towards it before she showed up and talked about it. There are a couple other memoirs which I think are less credible. So again, to the point that you can't assume that everything is credible just at face value. But we have several instances of mistresses making allegations that are proved over the course of history. But the knee-jerk reaction at the time is always, let's poke holes in this. Let's find out how this is not true. Let's see. I have a book here.
But I don't think no one's questioning Stormy Daniels, right?
Well, she has the advantage in that Michael Cohen's already flipped. We already know this payment was made to try to keep her quiet. So the one thing she has in her book that the Trump people do contest more vociferously is, was she threatened?
Right.
In 2011.
But no one's saying Donald Trump would never have sex with a porn star.
Right.
That's not happening.
Right. But I do think, you can go back to Thomas Jefferson and Sally Hemings. There's always been this sort of presumption, these allegations arise, and historians have said, let's find out how this is not true. Good. Let's not besmirch the reputation of a president unfairly. Let's go poke all the holes we can. So there's, in this Eisenhower book that I have, Kay Summersby said there was a dog that they kind of shared custody of that was sort of a part of their relationship. And he questions whether the chronology of the dog is really what Kay Summersby had. And for all I know, maybe it's not. Maybe she didn't get that right. And Summersby's book says herself, look, she wrote this a year before she died. She had cancer. It was many, many decades ago. She said, maybe my memory is hazy in certain parts. I can't vouch for every specific detail here. But we now see the letters that show a fairly deep emotional bond between the two of them, the kinds of letters that you don't normally write to your driver, which is what Summersby was in the war. So that's why I think the broader lesson here, to bring it back to Kavanaugh, is our knee-jerk response shouldn't be, let's find out how this person is lying. Let's give her the acid test and to see if this is all true, because maybe a detail or two is wrong, but you want to take a more holistic view to see what is the best sense of the truth that we can get, and do so in a way that doesn't besmirch the character of the accuser, or in the case of mistress, they're not accusing, but
right.
They're alleging.
I think in this case, though, and this was true of the Anita Hill thing, there is this isn't like, we don't have all day to figure this out, mm-hmm. right? We either sink this guy's nomination or confirm him. Mm-hmm. And to delay is to sink, right? I mean, you could say, hey...
Potentially, the Democrats take the Senate.
Yeah, and even if they don't, things change. I mean, it's essentially, you don't have... There is a time clock mm-hmm. that is running. And I think that clearly Republicans are strategically playing against the clock, just like a football game. We've got to, put points on the board while we can before the game ends. And I think Democrats are saying, no, let's delay. They're intentionally trying to run out the clock. So both sides are playing politics when it comes to the clock. This isn't like an allegation, let's say, against Donald Trump, which may be very important, but there's no specific timeline. We could have a month or a 2-month investigation. I think that's what makes this kind of uniquely difficult, is that it's sink or swim for him.
Yes. I'm going to give you the last words. I know you got a busy day ahead of you. I want to let you go.
All right.
But check out my Politico piece. The title is "I've read every presidential mistress memoir, including Stormy's," over at Politico magazine. What do you got to talk about, Matt?
Well, you deserve a Pulitzer for that, man. That's a hell of a heavy lift, and great job on that. Check out my columns at the Daily Beast. I've been writing about Kavanaugh. I have a piece coming out about how I think Kavanaugh, this whole incident, this whole, whatever you want to call it, has been difficult for the country, probably in the long term very bad for Republicans, because it just reinforces the whole war on women, party of white men thing. But in the short term, I think it's actually the biggest collateral damage are red state Democrats like Heidi Heitkamp in North Dakota, who I think are going down partly because of the Kavanaugh thing.
So Joe Donnelly, Indiana, already came out as a no. I think he's the first of the red state group to.
I think McCaskill's, isn't she?
Did she say no already?
I think she did.
Okay,
I think she's essentially.
And maybe, and I think Tester has.
Yeah, Tester has too. So check that out. Also, my podcast. I had Max Boot on recently to talk about his book about leaving the right and about the corrosion of conservatism, and a guy named Brian Lundy, who's used to be the head of the DNC. He was the executive director of the DNC. Then he ran Democrats for Bush in 2000, and he lives in North Dakota. And we did a deep dive on that Senate race out there. So check out the podcast, Matt Lewis and the News.
I will have a couple of new books and politics podcasts coming up soon, so be on the lookout.
Awesome. All right. Thanks, guys. See you next week.
Take care.